How big do you think Uber can be?
That is truly limitless. I mean, I don't think it's worth less than $150 to $200 billion when it goes public. They're nailing the food business right now. That's a whole other business. I mean, people...
Taking on FedEx, do you think that's something they would do?
You know, they're delivering packages in Hong Kong right now. There's that cool company Ship. I did not invest in Ship because I think it's something Uber can and likely will do. I don't own Postmates stock or Instacart stock because I think it's something Uber can and will do. I think Travis's ambition is boundless, but I think his ability to execute on that is completely unlimited.
You were working at a law firm, you were at Google.
Seriously, wait, that's got to come with a trigger warning. You can't just bring up working at a law firm and not...
You worked at a law firm, you made your way to Google, and you became one of the most successful angel investors. So if you could kind of pinpoint, you know, it almost seems like you always used a job you were at as kind of like a holding place for the job you wanted. What was it? How did you make that leap?
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about it as kind of leverage for the next job necessarily. I think that one of the things I look for in our best entrepreneurs, and that has connected our best entrepreneurs over time, whether it's Travis or Evan Williams or Kevin Systrom, is they just believe in the inevitability of their success. Like even when there's a setback, they don't wallow in it because they just know it's going to work out. And I don't mean they're there to sell you and convince you it's going to work out. They just know it. And strangely, in the back of my mind, I just always knew it was going to work out. I mean, I had a huge setback in the spring of 2000 where I went from $12 million net worth on paper to negative $4 million in a matter of days. And it sucked. I'm not going to say I didn't punch the wall, but I just knew I would dig out of that, and I knew it would work out, and I knew that somehow I would get out of a debt hole bigger than like the money I originally as a kid thought I would ever make in the world, and then I would go on to make something else.
Let's just talk a little bit about your portfolio. You left Google, about a year ago?
I left in December.
In December. And you've been full-time investing, advising ever since. Tell us about some of the companies you're working with.
Yeah, well, before I left Google, I actually had a couple investments. One was in PhotoBucket, which is sold to News Corp, and another one was in Twitter. And I found I was spending more and more time and getting more excited about working with these small companies again. And so when the opportunity to leave Google came up and actually do this full-time, I got pretty excited about it. So since then, I've been involved in 17 companies. I'm invested in about a third of them, but in all of them, I'm a professional advisor. So I work with these companies day in and out, kind of crafting strategy, building front pages, user experiences, then helping them through corporate events, anything from hiring to distribution deals to raising money and selling the company.
You mentioned PhotoBucket, and you've had a couple of other exits, if I remember correctly, too. So tell us your successes.
Yeah, PhotoBucket was a great success. I was really excited about that company, and those guys just relentlessly focused on user experience and built something over 60 million active users. And so it was an obvious target for acquisition. I've had small companies too. One was Octomatic. It was a Y Combinator company that had built a front end to eBay. We were able to sell that earlier last year to a Canadian company called Live Current Media. Those guys are really happy up there. And then I just sold a company called Omnisio to Google. There's 3 guys who built some really cool video mashup tools and annotation tools. And I think it was the first acquisition that YouTube had ever announced they'd done. So really fun, sponsored by the YouTube group.
I've also noticed that you seem to co-invest with some of the same people over and over again, like the BetaWorks guys. Tell us what it's like to work with them and why you like investing with the same people.
Yeah, well, I think there's an entire kind of tier of guys who are investing in early stage stuff. And it's not necessarily angels. It's people who are professional accelerators, advisors, and the economics of how we're doing deals are very different from a traditional venture fund. What's happened is the cost of building a company in the software and web space has come down by kind of 15x since 98, 99. And so these investments don't fit the profile of traditional VCs anymore. If you're going to move the needle for a VC who's got a $500 million fund, then you have to be looking at a $200-300 million exit to be meaningful to them and to their limited partners. We're building companies that take tens of thousands of dollars of investment up front and then sell for maybe 10 to 20 to $30 million. So not very interesting for traditional VCs, but for those of us participating in this early stage market, really interesting. And I think so what we're seeing is folks like BetaWorks, folks like Josh Koppelman at First Round Capital, Ron Conway and his Baseline Fund, Jeff Clavier, Mike Maples. There's a bunch of us operating in this tier. And so we end up doing co-investments just by fact that we're all kind of looking at the same stuff.
And Union Square Ventures, I would put in that same category too.
Sure. I think they do a little bit later stage stuff too. I try and focus on stuff that's in the stream of commerce somewhere, that's touching money, where companies are actually writing checks to my startups. And so, we've got companies that are either cash flow positive now or tipping into cash flow positive. And that's a really nice place to be in an environment like this.
I got into Twitter because Ev pulled me in. I was already a user in the product. I was already a believer, but I would not have made that first bet had Ev not pulled me in. But the later bets I made, where I raised multiple funds that invest just in Twitter, I'll take credit for those. By then, I kind of got it and was like, okay, I'm doubling back down in. Uber, I was there in the earlier days of that company coming together. And when Garrett Camp and Travis Kalanick put their heads together on something, it's just like blank check, just do it.
What I am looking for are founders, individual entrepreneurs, from whom I can sense the inevitability of their success. They just know in their bones that this thing is going to work out. The founders of Twitter, the founders of Uber, Instagram, Docker, Optimizely, Twilio, Lookout, Kickstarter. All of these people, all of these founders have in common that when you're looking at them, you can just feel, they know from the earliest days that their company is going to win.
A lot of people talked about your attention to detail and that you have so much attention to detail when it comes to entrepreneurs and how you look at investments. So what were the details that made you want to invest in, say, the founders of Instagram or Uber? Can you give us some specifics?
Yeah, I think my attention to detail comes up more when we start working together. My wife and I just finished building a house that took 4 years to build, and it's not a huge house. It's just we're absolutely obsessive about the way that wood meets that wood meets that wood in that corner, and so you might not get it from the shirts, but I really do care about aesthetics. I care about every pixel on the site. I care about simplicity. I think making things simple is one of the hardest things to do in the world. People underestimate simplicity because it doesn't look like it took that much effort, but taking stuff away from an app, taking stuff away from a site makes it work that much better, makes it easier for users, makes you make a lot more money, but it's the hardest thing to do. And so I do obsess over detail like that. But I think often that doesn't come up in the initial phase of getting into an Uber. Uber, Travis was an old buddy. I knew he had a lot of hustle. I knew he had a lot of drive and ambition. He has that inevitability of success. In the earliest days when he is pulling 8-hour sessions in our hot tub up in Truckee, we were talking about international expansion, and I think there were probably 3 cars in the network already. We were talking about moving food and packages around in 2009.
I keep talking to entrepreneurs who say that they are operating very leanly and that they started their business model that way. Can they cut costs any further? Is there sort of one piece of advice you can leave us with before you go for entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, I think there's been this big push by a lot of investors, kind of gurus in the space, to go raise as much money as you can and prepare for the nuclear winter. And I think that it does make sense to go ahead and have resources on hand and not be too lean and check that bank account balance. But at the same time, if you raise too much money, you're actually setting the bar of success really high for your company. Because if you take $5 million on 15, you're a $20 million post now, your VCs really aren't going to let you sell that for less than 60. And the number of people who can acquire you for $60 million is a lot fewer than the number of people who can acquire you for $10 or $20 million. And so what I fear are entrepreneurs pushing themselves into these binary outcomes where they either succeed in a big way or fail and get zero. And I like to really keep teams small, keep that burn small, keep the fundraising small, so that entrepreneurs are in control of their destiny, can choose their outcomes, and define success for themselves and not have a VC impose it on them.
All right, so think small.
Yeah, definitely think small, and then and keep control so that you can define what a positive outcome is. A VC may not be intrigued by a $15 million sale, but when you see a couple of 22-year-olds holding checks for $3 million each, they have big smiles on their faces.